When I was a kid, at 3, I saw a probably 16 millimeter black, version of the 1936 movie, and it just stunned me. It occurred to me about 1990,
and I really felt I wanted to tell the story about first frontier American hero in a very romantic relationship with a woman set against these massive political conflicts.
It's not as I imagined it would be, thinking of it in Boston.
The frontier is the only land available to people. Out here, they're beholden to none.
I thought all our colonial scouts were in the militia.
I ain't your scout. We sure ain't in no damn militia.
if you imagine a war that's rolling across your landscape with many different sides and many different alliances, that is what the summer of 1757 was.
And I wanted to see if I couldn't make these people live as real human beings.
The book isn't that accurate. It actually is a gross oversimplification and almost a childish idea of noble savages and Indians who aren't competent stewards of their land, and therefore it's much better that Euro-Americans own all of their lands. The reality was a lot different. As a professor at a university level, I was just astounded at how little people know about the native people of this country. It's just not told. It's just not in your books, just not there. But I suppose if you're going to be taking something away from somebody, it's not a good idea to personify them in any good light. But it's a disservice to the nation, to the people. They should know, just how dependent they were and how much they owe to native people of this country.
There's nothing simple and monosyllabic about the Indian cultures that these people were dealing with. The Mohawks, for example, were extremely complex. They had had 150 years of dealing with the Europeans and dealt with them very successfully. They played France off against England very adroitly. In 1757, they probably controlled 75% of the world's fur trade as both merchants of fur, middlemen for other Indian tribes, and also trappers.
My father's people say that at the birth of the sun and of his brother the moon, their mother died. So the sun gave to the earth her body from which was to spring all life. And he drew forth from her breast the stars. And stars he threw into the night sky to remind him of her soul.
1757, the French and the English, they were battling over the control of the Canadian border, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the St. Lawrence River, and the entrance into the Great Lakes. So at the time, the Hurons were allied with the French. And the French used the Hurons just as the English used the Iroquois, and the Iroquois used the English, and the Hurons used the French. The Iroquois particularly were the dominant military and commercial force on the northwestern frontier, and their hegemony stretched from everything north of New York City all the way across the Great Lakes.
There was something in the first few pages, the family working together, running through the forest, hunting on foot, and the way in which Michael had described that. That's what really kept drawing me back to it over and over again. It's the artistic commitment of Daniel and my left foot that tells me this is the guy.
I think every time Daniel read, he was finding something in the character. And I also think, Michael, you got the feeling that they were learning about one another. You could sense their relationship. You could see how close they were getting.
trying to capture the quintessence of being Hawkeye, having all the skill sets. Daniel Boone acquired all these. Daniel Boone could go off in the wilderness for himself 8-9 months and hunt, trap, be warm, have 3 meals a day by himself in the wilderness.
He takes on the physicality of the character. He went through all of this training, I think, in Alabama, survival training. I used to watch him go for long runs with his gun strapped to his back. And he drank what he used to call cement for this movie because he had to build up so much.
I don't mind doing anything my body doesn't like it. My body doesn't put on muscle. So it also involved eating vast amounts of food, which for me was also a difficult thing.
So I found a Special Forces colonel at Fort Bragg who taught survival to pilots if they got shot down about how to get out of some forest that you might find yourself in. And he's using the same methods that Euro-Americans acquired from the Indians exactly in this period.
Michael says to me, I have a great actor. I've already acquired him for this film. I know he is the person that I need, but I also know that he has absolutely no experience. He's never fired weapons. He's the son of a poet. So I need you to engross him into those learned skills that this individual would have as an outdoorsman, a frontiersman, and a person of that time period.
You split your wood where the grain is open. See, we've got some split. See how we split it over there?
We went to Special Operations Center, and for us, they designed a course which involved also unarmed combat and a lot of weapons.
Wherever your eyes are at, that's where your muzzle should be, too. Because if you see him, you can shoot him.
Taught him how to use the M16, shotguns, handguns. And as we got him into all these contemporary skills, we were ultimately preparing him for that time when we would progress him backwards.
All we want to do is make a little bird nest, please.
Yeah, there was a guy who basically lives in the 18th century. I mean, way beyond being a reenactor. That is his life. And he knew everything about trapping at that time, about fire building, about cooking, about skinning animals. There was nothing he didn't know about in connection with that world. And when we met him, he was in perfect frontiers dress of that period.
Hand-to-hand combat with edged weapons. That was the nature of war, and came up with the idea of getting an 18th century saber fighting manual, because the blows and the parries with the saber are very similar to a tomahawk.
One move leads to another. It's like in boxing, it's the 1-2-3 punch. You don't want just one move, you want it to be a combination or a series to where you can accomplish the objective, which usually is to render the assailant incapable of any further assault. For instance, in the knife fight, the vessels are on the inside. On the inside at the wrist, to take a serious strike here, you maybe have 1.5 minutes. Underneath the arm in a major artery, a half a minute. If it gets you on the carotid artery, less. You're going to pass out in just a few seconds.
They found the fastest loader of a black powder weapon on the run, because when I saw that detail in the script, I thought, well, that just is not possible to load a black powder rifle on the run. You just can't do that. But there is, of course, somebody who can do it really, really well.
It is intimidating to be in the forest when you're hunting and realizing you have one shot, because it might take a skilled rifleman 1 minute to reload. So you're only going to get one shot, and if you miss that deer, you may starve to death.
If you're living in a very hostile environment, you have no choice but to deal with practicalities first and foremost. That has to be built into your experience from a very, very early age. Otherwise, you will fail and die in those places.
Tracking became a big thing with us. You're tracking it, you're tracking animals, tracking people. What you're reading from a hoof print that's in mud that is hard. You know, if it's hard and it's still well formed and defined, wind erosion hasn't tipped over the edges, so it's probably fresh. If it's well formed, then this deer went on this path when it was wet, and then it dried. And you remember it rained yesterday, so this deer came through here yesterday.
The work that we did, I was grateful for it. I needed it. And Michael and I together were able to explore a way of life which was real to those people at that time. So I think it comes through the details of discovering a way of life.
I could see him changing into that person daily as we would move forward, as he absorbed these different talents and skills. I remember on his last day of training, he fired the weapon, continually striking the bullseye.
It either has to be necessary psychological background, or it's because it delivers Daniel Day-Lewis to a place where there's no question of confidence. He is Hawkeye. He could do everything Hawkeye could do.
There's no wasted experience. If in the discovery of it, you're becoming at ease with it. Finally, it's all about being at ease with the life that you have.
In every gesture, in every moment in which Hawkeye is in conflict or repose, how he stands, all of this is manifest. Then comes the second layer, which are what are your values, what are your mores, how do you view the material world, how do you view the sky, how do you view the land, how do you view real estate. In a culture that Hawkeye's a personification of, you don't own land any more than you own the sky. So you guys get down to the water. It's going to be very smoky in here.
The anthropology has to be done almost through the back door. And somehow you have to learn them through subjective channels, if that makes sense.
All right, here we go. And action!
He just creates a world and he lives in it. And so whether he's running or making love or whatever it is he's doing, he's in that character, I think, body and soul.
The only thing on film that's finally important is whether some moments of truth are achieved. But those moments can only really be achieved through a certain kind of anarchy of the spirit, I suppose.
I think that Daniel is very smart, that he likes to not necessarily reveal his process. We never discussed the scenes heavily. I don't think he wanted to engage in a discussion because I think he was incredibly respectful to Michael. Michael was very much the general, and Daniel was his soldier. And Daniel understood that chain of command.
Cora! My father warned me about people like you. He said, do not try to understand them. Do not try to make them understand you.
Thank you so much.
Part of the challenge was to attempt to tell a love story between Hawkeye and Cora and these two people who meet across cultural and class barriers.
You're not coming with us?
I got a reason to stay. Miss Monroe?
That reason wear a striped skirt and work in the surgery.
It does. But done holding hands with Miss Monroe.
For Cora, it all opens up in her contact with Hawkeye.
He is guilty of sedition. Must be tried and hanged like any other criminal.
He saved us. We're alive only because of him. Are those the actions of a criminal?
I read that script twice, and I didn't understand it because it read to me as an action picture. But then I didn't know Michael Mann. And then somebody said, this is very much a love story, and this is why. And then I had very positive feelings toward what I was reading. And I did sort of a test with Daniel.
Why didn't you leave when you had the chance?
Because what I'm interested in is right here.
And that's how he made his decision, because the chemistry was right. And Michael was very sensitive to how people looked together. He felt that we were the closest match.
Madeline was one of my favorite actresses, and the way Michael took to her, wow. And then, when we read with Daniel, you could just see it in the room. There was no question. She was strong and yet soft. She was tough, but yet romantic. Madeline had an intelligence that really worked for the role.
What I noticed when I cast her, this is a woman who inside just has this fire and could be completely uninhibited. I said something and she had this outrageous kind of laugh. Just like, whoa, you know, and it was, you know, this wild spirit, this exuberance. And I thought, that's it, you know, she's Cora.
Michael, during the rehearsal process, would find, for instance, fabric selections and have us hold bolts of fabric to our body. We'd come to rehearsal with our hair done, and he would walk around us, revolve around us to see where to shoot us from. And that was incredibly unusual for a director to do.
You know, where is Cora from? You know, that's one of the questions we faced. I mean, who is she really? If you are a young woman of that age, you know, where are you coming from? What's your background? What music were you listening to? What neighborhood were you living in London? What were her attitudes towards courtship, towards marriage, towards what do I do with my life?
What are you looking at, sir?
Well, I'm looking at you, miss.
Hawkeye says, I'm looking at you, miss. And her first reaction is one of unease because of being stared at that boldly and directly by someone who says, I like you, I want you, and everything in between. And then a kind of wildness, that fire rises within her. And in that kind of declaration of the independence of my own will and what I want to do, which is, you know, I'm liking what I'm looking at too. At that moment, character Cora, she arrives truly into the present.
It defined both the differences between those two people in their cultures, and yet somehow also it threw a bridge between them, because Cora is changing so much in that environment and discovering parts of herself that have been necessarily repressed.
You know, it's a very primal thing because he's sort of this epitome of a certain kind of man. He's an alpha male, you know, and women are naturally drawn and attracted to that, I think. But he has also a kind of containment that's very arresting.
Very dire circumstances befall Hawkeye and Cora and Hayward, who's a British officer who's also in love with Cora. They are about to be captured by Hurons, and there's no way out. There's no possible exit.
Yes! Go ahead!
There's one route out that only Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas might survive, but it means abandoning Cora.
I want you to go!
If we go, there's a chance there won't be a fight. There's no powder. If we don't go in that, there's no chance. None. Do you understand?
Cora has come to see the world the way Hawkeye sees the world. And she says, no, you must go, because if only one of us survives, the other does too.
You've done everything you can do. Save yourself!
Stay alive. If they don't kill you, they'll take you north up to the Huron land. Submit, you're here. You're strong. You survive. You stay alive no matter what occurs. I will find you. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far. I will find you.
And he's basically saying to her, you may be brutalized, beaten, raped, tortured, whatever it is, submit within yourself, and I will find you. Stay alive, no matter what has to happen to you. Stay alive, because you're my heart, you're my soul, I will find you. That's that message. It's a very, very tough message.
In the poetry of that pragmatism about preserving life any way you can, there's a heroism.
We had a core group of Indian actors. Wes Studi, who was brilliant. And I was fortunate to have Russell Means and Dennis Banks. And I remember the first time I saw a picture of the two of them together at Wounded Knee when they had that standoff against the FBI. You know, and so this was a wild idea. Wow, what if I could get Russell Means and Dennis Banks to play Chingachgook and Ongeuscone?
Now, les Français bring Huron, Ottawa, Abenaki onto Mohawk land.
Russell was, you know, he was a man who was comfortably enjoying being 55 years old and living life in the more sedentary way, and all of a sudden I'm asking him to start running up hills, and he put himself back in shape in about 3 or 4 weeks.
Background! And action!
Michael, he always had a socio-political context that he interwove with the emotions of the story.
Cut. Sit there.
He'd find the specific moments to lock into, and he would always talk about what her expectations were and how they've been dashed.
Action, Wes. Go, Garen.
The internal functioning of the character is something that Michael definitely pulls out, plays to, and manipulates, if you will.
I remember feeling as if Michael was a third entity in the scenes. And it's something that you pray for in a director, and he had a way of doing it that didn't feel intrusive, but it was sort of a funny union. And I knew that if we went again and again and again, it was because he was looking at some maybe minor detail. It might have to do with where my head might have been placed in an over-the-shoulder, or the way a lock of hair would affect him. He has emotional responses to things that the ordinary person isn't going to see, but that they get subliminally.
When the gray hair is dead, Magua will eat his heart. Before he dies, Magua will put his children under the knife so the gray hair will know his seed is wiped out forever.
Michael has an affinity for the bad guy, or the man who's considered the bad guy. Magua grew because Michael allowed him or encouraged him. I did not play Magua as the bad guy. I mean, he's doing all of the things that he's doing for the right reasons as far as he's concerned.
Magua's village and lodges were burnt. Magua's children were killed by the English.
It's turbulent times, and Magua was a result of those turbulent times.
Magua, most interestingly, the antagonist, the villain of the piece, probably has the most insightful political analysis of all, and he has the most proactive vision, which is a quite courageous vision.
Would Magua use the ways of Les Français and the Yengeese? Would you?
Yes!
Even though he's the villain, which is what makes him complex and kind of wonderful, which is that what we should do is make ourselves as the Europeans.
Prendre le terre des Abenaki. Et le pour des Osage, sac ou fox. La faire commerce, dans l'art, avec les autres nations indiennes.
We should engage in exploitation, we should become mercantile, we should engage in trade, because the historical reality has entered their lives, not entered our future.
L'homme blanc vient comme l'aube de jour. Et la nuit, tu amènes ça pour le futur. Notre conseil se pose la question depuis que je suis enfant. Cordove les Hurons.
The lifestyle had changed drastically for the Indians when our brother came. He brought with him all of these things, and he also brought a lot of people. So it was not as if you had an option. You had to address the situation at all times, and they were coming by the hundreds of thousands.
Go to your left, Jody. Okay, then come on forward, ahead of Madeline a little bit.
He insisted that we stand in for ourselves. I think that that's where his thread to us became more established.
You're gonna fire, Stu, we'll see if it's at the same spot.
I think that he then began to understand people's moods and, you know, if they fainted, if they zigged instead of zagged, he knew it.
Action.
And at first, you'd be sometimes confined in the frame.
Is that about the same spot?
But ultimately, that was a very freeing thing for me because it allowed me to express internally whatever it was that was going on.
All right, we have Jody marked, Alan marked.
Yes, sir. Without having to reach out to externals.
Ready, and background, action. Jody, ready. Action!
Michael's a general, and you need a general to do that kind of work.
Have your eye line be towards me, in this direction.
The mustering and organizing and controlling day after day after day of a huge group of people. You feel that you're pitting yourself against something because every day so many different things try to thwart you in your endeavor.
Ready!
And Michael's the person to be with in those kind of situations because there'll be no surrender.
Okay, let's reload. Once again, please.
We trained about 75 guys who became our infantry, and we actually cross-trained them to be English infantry, French infantry, English artillery, and French artillery.
My task for Michael Mann and the last of the Mohicans was to build a military unit. In fact, I built it after the model of the 35th Regiment of Foot.
You better fall in. You better be silent.
I had to then take these 30 reenactors that I had sort of recruited. They weren't performers, and I didn't want them to be. There was no call for them to be actors. There was call for them to be soldiers.
Now shoot. Bayonet. Ready. Develop. Recover.
And the only way to build them is quite simply to build their endurance, to build their physicality until they understand how tough that life was.
How do we feel, 35th Regiment of Foot? Kill fucker, sir!
They had slow-burning black powder. So to move a projectile, you needed an immense amount of it. To contain an immense amount of it, you needed an immensely heavy and large mortar, which required many oxen and men to move.
The cannons that the French are firing came from Fort Caroline, which we renamed Fort Ticonderoga. Those were brought down on barges, but half the journey is overland. 20 to 30,000 pound cannons manhandled on rolling logs by an army to assault Fort William Henry.
The situation is his guns are bigger than mine and he has more of them. They keep our heads down while his troops dig 30 yards of trench a day. When those trenches are 200 yards from the fort and within range, he'll bring in these 15-inch mortars, lob explosive rounds over our walls and pound us to dust.
We've built about 20 cannons and 5 mortars that are huge. And they're the right size, but they're not made out of solid iron the way they were.
We had to invent how to build these cannons and fire them so we could fire them and something would come out and they'd behave like real cannons.
We used black basketballs for the mortar shells. Because one of the shots Michael wanted was he wanted to see the mortar shell going through the air up to the fort. So, and actually got to where it's so good we could hit the fort with it. So then we shot a lot of them then. It's
I recall seeing a truckload of cannons come in, and Michael rushed outside the production office to take a look at these cannons, and they looked terrific to me. Great 25-pounder and 12-pounder Napoleons and that sort of thing. One of the very first sequences we did was a forest ambush. The British were in linear formation, moving along a forest track. The forest track had high ground on both sides.
You could just feel the tension and the anticipation, the absolute adrenaline pumping in everybody alongside those hills like that. And it was like the real thing is going to happen here very soon.
Then that one Indian comes running out and goes straight into the line and whacks that guy. That was just woof. More than just hundreds coming in. That one guy just doing that was unbelievable.
The film is actually a Western, if you think about it. It's a Western in the sense that this was as far west as whites had come. I think a lot of filmmakers these days don't like to go to distant locations. They want to do what's handy.
We've learned many wilderness tricks in this movie, such as getting on boats.
Michael tends to find what's honest, even if it's the most difficult path.
This is before GPS, and so we flew around in a helicopter with a LORAN device that told you where you are in degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc on the planet Earth. So if we're spotting it from the air, now we have to find a way to get to it from the ground. And how do you know you are on this one mountaintop amongst 17 little peaks and valleys all over the place?
We've been flying over forest for I don't know how many hours. I'd never seen forest like that, ever. The atmosphere was heavy, and I remember a sense of suffocation as we landed. Thought, we're going into this forest, we're not coming out for 6 months.
Because the fort had to be on the frontier, i.e. it's a wilderness fort, that means you can't see roads, you can't see people's boathouses, you can't see contrails of airplanes, you can't see highways. And you had to be someplace forested. We found it in the Blue Ridge Mountains in western North Carolina. We cleared a 40-acre site. We used much of the wood to build the fort. So the fort was completely constructed inside and out on 3 sides.
And it made no sense to build this out of anything except original materials because it was cost-effective and authentic. So the fort, Cameron's cabin, log cabin, was built out of hewn logs.
Everything was built for real almost. I mean, Fort William was built for real, with real logs. The homestead was built with real logs. The Indian village was built with the bark of the trees. We even waited till the spring when the bark came off the trees. It was all from Mother Nature. Everything was from nature.
Wolf Kroger knew exactly what I wanted to get. That it wasn't just a set. It's not just something you walk through or look at. This is a real place. And he understood how important the detail is because when you're on the set, you believe it.
It got very rainy and muddy, which is also a good thing because all that mud stuck everywhere. So it was a feeling of reality. You know, once you go in the studio, you're lost. I mean, you try to recreate it, and it's never the same.
We did do a lot of research working with some people at the Smithsonian to get the Huron aesthetic and the Abenaki aesthetic and the Mohawk aesthetic to be able to have our people feel, whether it's an extra or a character, feel like they really are an individual who has expression that he manifests in the war paint he puts on, the tattoo he wears, and that he comes from someplace, that he comes from a culture that has the characteristics that cultures truly do have.
Need a big one?
Yeah. And we generated a set of characteristics that extended from war club design to the way they wore their hair, to the fabrics that we manufactured of every single tribe. It was generated from anthropological research and Catlin's prints from the 1820s to try, in our feeble way, and I mean feeble way, to capture this unbelievable aesthetic.
There's a very famous painting called The Death of Wolf,
in which he's lying there, and off to his left is a Mohawk. Now that Mohawk has staggering fabric design and tattoo patterns on him, and we used that extensively. So we would use people who appeared in the left bottom corner of paintings.
Background.
Michael is always extremely synthetic when he introduces a cinematographer to how to find the language for that particular film. To a point in which, for instance, for Last of the Mohicans, he gave me a couple of books. One was a book on Thomas Cole, the late 1800 painter. And the other one was a book on Albert Bystad, landscape painters. They were showing the very tiny human being in the middle of the power and the dimension of nature.
When we're out in the wilderness, really sort of evokes a feeling that the characters and the landscape are inextricable.
Alice, can we rest here?
Absolutely.
The character's volatility really had a sense of naturalism about it that reminded me of the setting, and vice versa. I couldn't separate them. You felt the weather, you felt the color of the leaves, the shimmer of the water, all these kind of things. And you didn't feel like those people didn't belong there.
The challenge was to make it look like you are in the 18th century, and light is by fire, it's firelight. It's not tungsten light, and it's not pervasive, it's very sourcey. And in daylight, in an interior, there are no lights. So consequently, if you're where the sunlight is coming in, you're lit. But if you're sitting towards the back of the room, as is General Webb with Magua and the shadows, you're sitting in the shade. It should look like it's dark. And there's so much period kind of vibe and feeling you get when it looks like, wow, this looks real. You don't know exactly what it's because the lighting is real.
Michael has a very good sense of music as an element of movie making, and he does actually know instinctively what is going to aid and abet his vision of the movie. He's saying, I don't want to qualify the action. Do not score the drama. He didn't want the music to overtly state what was obviously on the screen.
We were searching for the theme and couldn't really find the basic melody. And my wife Summer called, and she said, I just heard a contemporary piece of Irish folk music that I think is really great, and you should listen to it. And I tracked it down with something called the Gael, G-A-E-L, and I said, this is great, we acquired it, and I brought it to Trevor. And he played it, and I said, play the harmony. He played the harmony. I said, okay, the harmony is the main theme. The song itself is going to be the love theme.
I started stacking up other ideas which could all be counterpointed. So they stacked up in much the same way as Michael's telling of the story. You have so many strands going. You have the Hawkeye, Cora love aspect, you have the Uncas and Alice, you have Magua, you have the trappers, you have the colonials, you have the British, the French, and so on. So you have all these disparate elements, and that's why I think people compare the movie as a symphonic piece, because you've got these counterpointed stories running concurrently, just like a piece of music.
I knew I wanted Celtic music. I mean, that was a foregone conclusion, given Hawkeye's origins. And so the hypnotic repetitions at the end of the film, when Uncas is pursuing Magua, who's taken Alice away, everything leading to the end, that whole 12-minute, the Celtic basis of that, the repetition of it, to me has tremendous sound.
It starts out with these chords, and then it starts to build and build and build, introducing all the themes that I used in the film.
And so the movie has many, many conflicts and crises all rolling into one ultimate one, which is what are all the indigenous people to do? And that is a question that's existential. Like, you know, we are facing the end of our existence. What are we to do? As we drive to the end in the fatal battle between Chingachgook and Magua, there's a moment in which clearly Chingachgook has destroyed Magua's body. And before he kills him, the two men look at each other. Chingachgook, a Mohican, Magua, a Huron, look at each other. And in that gaze is the whole of this content. There is no answer. It's a horrible, tragic conflict to which there is no solution. Their whole past is collapsing into that present moment, and everything that they have been and everything they want to be is on the line in that present moment. It's one of those kinds of dramatic situations. In the final scene of the film, we're looking at wilderness, and wilderness is the frontier. And the frontier moves like time. The frontier is conflict between the past and the future, and it's a rolling zone, and it's rolling west in the Americas, and that's what they're looking. They're looking at the future, and their individual lives will continue on, and people will come after them, and they will have struggles, and they will have lives, just as we all do. We were trying to make their lives come alive and make a piece of history come alive.